know this group covers both intellectual property and information technology, so it's a broad spectrum in terms of what this group covers from, IP, patent, trademarks, copyright issues, to the TMT aspect. So really kind of a broad range spectrum. Is anybody else new? Is this their first time attending?
Yeah, this is Hannah from Zettervalls in Sweden. This is also my first time in this meeting. Nice to meet you all.
Welcome, Hannah.
Thank you.
Hi, here Sebastian from Alfaro Abogados in Buenos Aires. It's my first time here. Actually, I'm not an IP guy, but it's interesting to hear about this points of the agenda that I read. So, hi to everybody.
Welcome, Sebastian. And I know that I've seen you at other practice group meetings.
Yes.
So, welcome to IPIT. Well, I won't take up too much more time. I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to our practice group leaders. So for the new folks, our practice group leaders, we've got 3 leaders for this group. Jane Wang in Taiwan is the co-chair for the Asia region. Per Lidman at Zettervalls in Sweden is the co-chair for EMEA. And then Amalia Berg at Goodman's in Canada is our co-chair for the Americas. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to Per, who has organized our panel discussion for today. And of course, if you have questions or want to chime into the conversation, we welcome everyone to participate. Per?
Thank you, Hannah. Well, and then just first welcome everyone. My name is Per Lidman, as Hannah said. I'm with Zettervalls in Sweden and the EMEA head of IPIT at the World Law Group. But this is definitely not about me, but about a much more interesting topic of autonomous vehicles, or as I have learned, rather autonomous products and services. And we will hear from my Swedish colleagues, Fredrik Roos and Astrid Svensson. And we will also hear from Matt Hervey at Gowling's WLG in the UK. Fredrik and Astrid will talk on a high level on where the technology development is at present and the wide range of legal issues associated with autonomous products and services. And Matt will go into some more depth and talk about IP issues and also some regulatory, if I understand it correctly. But and at the end, there will be time for some Q&A. So if the presenters do not say otherwise, please note your questions and we'll take them at the end. Okay, Fredrik and Astrid, over to you.
Thank you, Per. So Hannah, will you be sharing the PowerPoint?
You can go ahead and share the slides yourself using the share screen at the bottom. I just saw that they were sent over, but if you want to pull those up, you can go ahead using share screen.
Yeah, we'll see if I will start to make the introduction, and we'll see if my colleague Astrid can share it.
Anna, do you think you can share it? Because my PowerPoint doesn't really seem to work.
Do you want me to keep the game?
They sort of Per warned us we will always have 5 minutes of mandatory technical issues. So I guess that's it.
Give me a second and I will share it.
I think
Is it now in presentation mode?
Great, thank you, Per. So
yes.
Just a short introduction to us and the team. My name is Fredrik Roos, and I have 20 years experience as a tech lawyer. I joined Zettervalls back in 2003, and I have been the head of the IP tech team for about 12 years, I think. And the IP tech team at Zettervall that you may know of from Per, we are now a 50+ lawyer strong team divided in our 3 offices, Stockholm, Gothenburg, and Malmö. I think that that makes us one of the strongest and largest teams in Sweden in this area, probably the largest, but I know enough marketing law to know that I should not say that because it depends on how you count and so on. Many of you know, I think you know Per from our Malmö office, and you probably know also that they are known for their leading patent litigation practice, among other things in the IP area. And if we look at the Gothenburg team where I am based, our strong point has always been new technologies and, due to our geographical location, automotive. And I think that over the last probably 15 years, but especially the last 10 years, the areas of new technologies and automotive has really merged. So that has created a lot of interesting opportunities for us. And that's why we're here today. And with me today, I have Astrid.
Yes, hi everyone. So my name is Astrid Svensson and I work as an associate here at the Gothenburg office, also part of the IP Tech commercial team. And I've been here for about 3.5 years, so not as long as Fredrik. And I'm internally responsible for the GDPR group here in Gothenburg, also with a strong focus of the automotive sector. And that's what we will talk about today. We will talk about autonomous vehicles and transportation, which Fredrik and I have had the opportunity to work a lot with for the past years.
Yeah, and I think that Astrid is probably the only one on this call who can say that she has spent more than 50% of her career working on autonomous vehicle deals. So that makes her a young expert in this field. So then I will let Astrid kick off on the next slide.
Yes. So in the foreseeable future, hopefully, we will see a mixture of traditional vehicles as well as safe self-driving vehicles without any physical drivers. And we believe that the autonomous vehicles will transform the way we transport ourselves as well as how we transfer goods around the world. We see both opportunities for sales of autonomous vehicles, but we also see a rapid increase in autonomous services. And with autonomous services, we mean, for example, taxi services, transportation services, and other kinds of autonomous delivery services. So there are many opportunities here, different kinds of services and different models. And there is an ongoing technical race here. Many actors are involved and strive for full autonomy and to be the first to deliver safe and self-driving vehicles. And you might think, how does this work? Well, we will have to wait and see. I think there will be many different kinds of ways, but in general, it's a traditional vehicle which will be equipped with sensors and radars that will collect relevant information about its surroundings, the road conditions, and this will also be accompanied by a virtual driver. And it feels like we have discussed autonomous vehicles for a long time now. It's been on the agenda for many, many years, and it's been discussed as a big game changer for a long time now. So Fredrik, why are we not here yet? Seems to be a delay.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you can go back one slide so that we don't have everyone Googling tech stock and things like that. So now I was supposed to say something about, where are we today and why have we not gotten further and what's going to happen the next couple of years. It was very interesting. Less than 1 hour before this call, I got an email with a newsletter which started, in recent years, autonomous vehicle technology has undergone rapid development, and it is predicted that autonomous vehicles may soon be in a state to displace human driving altogether. So that newsletter came very timely. And I think that I did my first autonomous vehicle deal almost 10 years ago, and we've always been 2 to 3 years away from the launch. That is when what clients and suppliers and tech acquisition targets and so on, everyone has been talking about for 10 years. And for a long period of time, I think that everyone's ambitions were very high. We had self-driving taxi tests in downtown San Francisco very early on in the development. There was talk about autonomous helicopters, and like the sky was the limit, so to speak. And then I think that the turning point was the Uber accident back in 2018 that I think that most of you have heard about because it hit the news. So there was an accident in Phoenix involving a self-driving test vehicle. It was a Volvo XC90 equipped with Uber's self-driving stack, so Uber's sensors and Uber's software. And it failed to identify a woman walking over the street with a bicycle. And this was quite a large street, so the vehicle was traveling at high speed. And unfortunately as well, there's a big lawsuit around this and then a lot of things to see online. Seems like the safety driver was watching TV on her phone basically when this happened. So she failed to intervene and it was a fatal accident. Regardless of the details of that case and you know all the liability aspects that came out from that, this had a huge impact on the development efforts in the industry. So there were big steps back. The industry realized that safety needed to be the #1 priority. It had a big impact on a lot of programs. For example, Uber, they closed down their entire tracking program to focus entirely on the cars, so the personal vehicle technology, in order to increase the capabilities there and the safety. And also had a big impact on the, especially automotive industry, I think, because there was a greater realization on the impact on brands. Like in this case, it was a Volvo XC90 and they had a collaboration with Uber, although it was Uber's self-driving technology that had failed in this case. So Volvo was developing its own technology in parallel with other partners. But it still, there was a big risk for the brand, and especially for Volvo being one of the brands. Mercedes is another one where safety is a key part. So I think that this has been a great factor, the Uber incident in 2018. But now maybe we're seeing some change. It's not like we've been standing still for 10 years. I mean, we still have a lot of autonomous technology and autonomous vehicle operating today, but they have taken a more reasonable approach. So rather than taxi service in downtown San Francisco, we have operations running today in mining operation, for example, on private closed roads, controlled roads in mining sites, in other confined areas that can be controlled, like ports, for example. And there are some pilot cases also running on public roads, especially then specific highway sections. And we have that in various countries. And I think that that's the way forward, is like taking a more reasonable approach to where do we start with implementing this technology. And I think that the big first implementation and launch on public roads will be like simple use cases. So straight highways, only operating on daytime because it's easier with the sensors and so on, driving from depot to depot on the highway to transport goods, and not operating in cities at first where there are lots of cars and especially pedestrians. That will have to come later. Seems like we have accelerated the last couple of years, like highlighted by this newsletter I just got. And at the same time, though, we have to be conscious of that the financial climate today is, as you read about in the paper every day, that is also affecting, because it will cut down R&D funding. It does decrease valuations drastically, making it more difficult to get funds. So that has a great effect on many of the players. Many of them are down by more than 50% over the last 6 months in this industry. They've been hit extra hard, but also favored extra much before. So, and just some last words before we go into the next slide is, why is this so interesting? Why is this so big? And if I focus on, we are more in the business side. So if we talk more about the trucks and the transportation industry, That's where we have the greatest experience. I think this is going to be an area where it's exploding. We have a growing middle class. We have growing e-commerce all over the world. A very poor utilization in transportation today. So that will not only be solved by self-driving, but with implementing technical platforms for the self-driving. And there's a great lack of truck drivers. Not everyone knows that, but in Europe, which is partly solved by using a lot of Eastern Europe labor, like some of the biggest truck driving operations are in Eastern Europe. But still, there's a great lack of truck drivers, and the problem in the US is even worse. So a truck driver with no experience in US going in, not self-employed, not owning their own truck or anything, going in as an employee, can earn today the same that we pay our 5th-year associates at festivals. So that's pretty extreme. So there's a lot of money in this area. That's why I think all of you should get into this area if you're not already there, and take your part. So then we can move to the next slide. So I think the other thing that's interesting that happened is that the players that are active in this field, and I think the reasons for that is what I just explained. That is, it's very diverse. It's not like it used to be. It used to be focused on the product, and then there would be the OEM who would build a self-driving car or the self-driving truck. But in the future, it's more about the service, the end-to-end service, whether it's a taxi service or a shipping service. And there are a lot of players who want their part of this. You have the specific actors like Uber, for example, who are building platform companies, building more of a booking platform. That's what they have for the app that we all use. But that's also what they have for their Uber Freight app. Then you have the traditional shipping companies, like the DHL and the FedEx. They don't want to lose their share to Uber Freight. So they are also into this. You obviously have the OEMs who are in a digitalization and transitioning to services. Like the Volvo Group, for example, in Sweden, has issued a very aggressive transformation plan that they published on their Capital Markets Day in 2019, that by 2030, they will have more than 50% of their revenue from services instead of being like before almost exclusively a product company. So the OEMs want their share. Now the tier 1 suppliers, they also are not happy with only being suppliers. So the Aptivs and Autoliv, for example, who made a spin-off for this area, Veoneer, they are also trying to get their share and being part of the customer interface. And then you have the startups, tech startups in California, especially, that are building the software, but also the sensors, the LiDARs, and other sensors for this technology. They are also not happy about only being suppliers, but they also try to move towards services and take a part of that share. And last but not least, you have the big tech. You have the Amazon and Google who started also their own self-driving technology company, Waymo, and they also want a part of this. And I think that part of that reason is also because of data, obviously. So data will become a key here. If you own the data about all the transportation networks, you're sitting on a gold mine. And lastly, you have the do-it-alls. So Tesla is in that space. They are trying to, in all the different angles, they want to own the platform, they want to build the trucks, the software for self-driving, and also to own the interface to the market. So we saw a tweet just yesterday or the day before from Elon Musk talking about his future application X. That will be a do-it-all app. And we already see that in China with WeChat, which is also doing the same services as Uber, among a lot of other things. So competition is fierce, and it's a completely new landscape. Obviously, a lot of opportunities for us lawyers. And Astrid?
Yeah, so as Fredrik said, we have a lot of players in this field. Some are competitors already today, some are future competitors, and some are potential partners. So what to think about when you partner up with a new partner or a competitor? Well, the trend today is to move away from supplier relationship. Instead, we see a lot of collaboration agreements because all the actors and all the players, they want to be part of the market. They want to have a big market share. So we see a lot of collaboration agreements, which is normally now required for these kind of cross collaborations between OEM companies with tech companies, tier one, startups, etc. And partnerships comes with a lot of benefits, but also a lot of challenges. It sounds very positive. You do something together and you go to markets together and you share the revenues and everything. But if you think about it, you have to split every single responsibility. You have to split ownership, money, costs, liabilities. It all has to be regulated in the contract. So when having partnerships, you need to consider the need to create incentives for both parties so that both parties have an incentive to create and develop the product or the service. Otherwise it won't be, well, in order for it to be a successful partnership, both parties need good incentives. And this needs to be reflected in the contract. And partnerships and collaborations may also lead to competition law issues. So this also needs to be analyzed on a case-by-case basis because not everyone can work together. Then we have a lot of R&D questions, Fredrik, that you want to discuss.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously this raises a lot of the traditional issues that we would normally have in R&D partnerships or relationships, but they have to be considered in a new way because these actors are not working together in the traditional sense of supplier customer. So that in itself creates a lot of interesting IP issues and licensing deals, cross-licensing deals typically, because it's not payment in monetary funds that is the remuneration here, but it's trading IP for IP or IP for data and so on. The IP issues is also, of course, focused on disputes partly. We've seen a lot of that. Some of these companies are valued very high, but most of their value is due to IP, if not all. So we have already seen a lot of disputes in this space. And another reason is that the number of experts on the software engineering side, especially, they are quite few when they are moving from company to company, especially in California. So you have seen like the people going from Tesla to Otto Trucking, which was then acquired by Uber. And then you have the next phase, you have Aurora being founded, and also coming people from both Tesla and Uber. And so there's a lot of litigation. Most of it has been settled so far, but there's been some interesting cases there. Because this technology, once it reaches a higher level, it will be very valuable. So, and obviously, like because of the data you mentioned, big issue here, or big value in that, and being shared by all these different players. After you already mentioned competition laws, that it does become an important factor when you talk about sharing data like that. And then you also have, like, we'll see future legislation on rights to access to data in order also from a competition law standpoint. So to open up the ecosystem. So that is also very interesting. And the last of the big legal topics, I think, is distribution of responsibility. And that is obviously, it could be a lecture in its own. But there are really complex product liability questions, warranties, third-party liability. I mean, obviously huge impacts here. I talked about earlier on the impact to the brand and goodwill. And I think that one of the key learnings I've made here over the different projects I've done, especially in the US, is that I think that the insurance industry is going to be really interesting to see because it needs to adapt to this. I think that will be the solution to a lot of these crossovers, like when all of this technology is integrated, it's software and it's the OEM's hardware technology and OEM software technology, and there's going to be a cloud over the autonomous operation and so on. So there's a lot of different things that could go wrong here and difficult to prove what caused it. But I think that in order to solve that problem, I think insurance is going to have a great role in that, and also need to change their business model. So that will be very interesting to see in the next couple of 5 years. Thank you. I think we have one last slide with some regulatory points before we hand it over to Matt.
Yes, so looking at the regulatory landscape, there are many countries around the world that are approaching the self-driving industry, and they are approaching it differently. Some countries are more in the forefront of promoting self-driving vehicles and services, and some countries allow permits, they allow pilots, and some countries do not yet. So, for example, from a Swedish perspective, the Swedish government deems it very important that Sweden is a country where new innovation and new technology can be tested and allowed. So the Swedish government has therefore decided to permit testing subject to specific permits issued by one of our authorities. And such permits will also be assigned with terms and conditions. So that's positive. And this is the typical question people think about. Is autonomous operations permitted on public roads or not? But there are so many more rules to consider, and we want to highlight this to you, because not only the permits for testing and operation are needed for autonomous transportation to actually be able to operate and to have services within the sector. Because if you think about it, we have a ton of rules today in the transportation sector, and basically all of these are regulated for manually driven vehicles. And there needs to be a driver. So there will be a need for new regulatory requirements for automotive safety, transportation permits, restriction of goods and services, etc. in the foreseeable future. And as the technology emerges, so will also the regulatory requirements. So for example, looking at vehicle safety standards today, there are basically none that are applicable for autonomous transportation. This will of course be something that will have to be created in the future. And considering all of the special rules for transporting, for example, if you transport liquids or dangerous goods, do you think these are designed for autonomous transportations today? Well, no, not yet. For example, we have requirements requiring human drivers to regularly check the goods before and during the transportation. How will that look for autonomous transportations when there is no driver? Well, we don't know yet, and we're regulatory monitoring the changing legal landscape, and we think there will be a lot of new legislation and lots of new updates.
So thank you. Then, Per, I think we can hand over to Matt.
That's brilliant. Per, if you stop sharing, I'll share my slide deck. Let's all see my slides. So, I'm actually happy to take any questions during as well. I'm very flexible about that. So I'm speaking from Gowling WLG. We are actually a global full service law firm, but we're a long-standing member of the World Law Group through our UK office. And automotive is one of our key sectors. If I can change my slide, there you go. And we act for many of the leading OEMs and suppliers. I put a selection of the ones we're allowed to name on screen now. And we also act for the UK trade body itself, which is the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders. And the range of work we do is very much full service, but the emphasis is definitely corporate and commercial quite a lot of trade advice, particularly after Brexit, financial compliance, when you think about sort of finances that people give people buying cars, and general stuff like employment, product liability, even pensions a lot for the big OEMs. And then my own team, IP, we give a lot of advice on brand enforcement in this space. Now, for autonomous vehicles in particular, it's generally corporate and commercial and IP work. A recent example, which has been in the trade press here, is we helped with the float on the London Stock Exchange of Auriga, and they do self-driving vehicles in specific circumstances, so things like airport luggage handling, stuff like that. But generally, our experience is the famous OEMs, the big name household names, aren't really doing the research in the UK, and the sort of hotbeds of that are places like Germany and San Francisco, and even a company like JLR, which is headquartered in the UK, their research is going on that outside of a jurisdiction, as it happens in Ireland. And so our local UK-based clients of this are often the competitor, new market entrants for disruptors, for companies which are leveraging a local centre of excellence in AI, such as Cambridge, and they're developing their own technology. So I'm not saying which of these we work for, but it's companies like Oxbotica and 5AI and Wave, where they're developing technology here to sell to OEMs ultimately. And much of what I do day to day with such companies is actually discussions on emerging regulation. My interface with companies is often head of policy rather than a lawyer. And as I think many of you on this call know, if you've ever done that kind of work, it's quite hard to monetize it. It's more about an investment and thought leadership to plant the flag for when money from corporate work or product liability disputes then comes down the tracks. So in that spirit, we have done an awful lot of thought leadership on autonomous vehicles in particular. And in fact, in the coming weeks, I'm assisting one of the UK disruptors and one of our big grocery suppliers on last mile delivery. They're pitching for a big government grant to help with that work. And the topics will be covering as thought leadership of proof of safety, privacy and equality, and as Frederick was mentioning, insurance models. So one of the leading insurers is involved in that. So we'll see what comes of our research over the coming year. We also come at autonomous vehicles from the broader perspective of AI in general. And I think it's fair to say that we're emerging as the leading firm in the UK for AI-related law. I'm the general editor of the leading practitioner's textbook, The Law of Artificial Intelligence, which is published by Sweet and Maxwell. And I've given a selection of the chapters here, the ones which will inevitably covering topics of great interest to automotive companies exploring AI. And we built up an international cross-border team to give sort of holistic advice when it comes to AI, but also to know the detail. And what we're finding is the key issues we're helping, let's say, a life sciences company with read across to automotive and vice versa. Now, autonomous vehicles and the law is a massive topic, but I'm going to talk briefly about passenger and last mile delivery, some technical challenges in the field, regulatory developments, and then a bit more on IP, which I know Astrid and Frederick already spoke about a bit, but I'll say some other stuff about it. So passenger and last mile delivery, Frederick and Astrid were more focused on trucks and freight and mining and the like. But passenger and last mile delivery are very much a focus of many OEMs and many startups. And the applications include ride hailing, so as it were, Uber and Lyft, but without a driver, deliveries to domestic addresses, so not large trucks, but small light vehicles which will come to your door, and the design and sale of private vehicles, which may give way over time to subscription models or mobility as a service. The big issue here is economics, and for ride hailing and last mile deliveries, the economics are pretty attractive in that the human driver is typically a very substantial part of the overall costs of delivering that service, maybe something between 30 and 50% of the overall cost. So you can instantly see why people are interested in eliminating the driver where possible. The business model for private journeys is far less certain. So I think OEMs feel they have to be active in this space because even if they don't achieve driverless cars, increasingly sophisticated driver assistance is a selling point to give you comfort and relaxation and safety. But also driving assistance creeps into some sort of level 4 driver assistance where you have fully autonomous driving in certain circumstances, such as on motorways. And there, in time, it's likely that passengers may be legally allowed not to watch the road and to get on with other things. So you can see why, as a private car owner, you might be very interested in that. But beyond that, to get to autonomous vehicles, which are fully autonomous most of the time, may in fact be a threat to car ownership itself. And that is because generally, many cars are only used about 2% of the time while you're paying insurance and maintenance and road tax and the like. And so if you're only using it 2% of the time, why own it when it could come and collect you instead? And so all of this is about mobility as a service. What will be the price per mile? So Cruise, for example, is expecting and targeting something like $1 per mile for mobility. But we did some analysis with London Transport and others, and there's concern that it could easily fall to maybe 15 cents per mile. So it's very hard to know the economics going in, who will pay for these fleets of cars, and when they don't know the actual effective price per mile of when these are deployed in numbers. And also, the price per mile falls consistently, falls unexpectedly to unusual levels. It may encourage unforeseen use cases because people don't use cars for everything because of the price now, but if it's that cheap, it may really change how people use it. So again, very many moving parts on the economic model. And then the other key issue with the private market and mobility as a service, and I think Frederick already used the all-important word, platform, and that is, will any of the OEMs, by entering into this race, will they become a de facto platform for some of the content and the purchases you make in an autonomous vehicle while you're not having to drive? But I think the more likely outcome is that automotive OEMs will follow the experience of the mobile phone manufacturers, who for a while attempted what's known as a walled garden, where they tried to monetize services by having their own offering, which you had to go through on their equipment. But that definitely gave way in the mobile sphere. And so the revenue flows there really go to the maker of the operating system. And that's why Apple has released CarPlay and Google has the Android Automotive OS, and they are being adopted by OEMs. And they have a different business model entirely. They get advertising revenue. They may even give away the technology rather than trying to monetize the technology themselves, because they're just getting their money from a different place. And then the other part of the market is the over-the-top players, so pure content players like Netflix and Amazon. So if you're watching video on the move, they may be the ones who are actually making the money out of that mobility as a service. And you may be getting mobility bundled up with connectivity and other essential services in the modern age. So amid all of this commercial uncertainty, there is undoubtedly a heavy investment, and there are early development deployments. So I've already talked about improving levels of driver assistance, and that's lane keeping and road following and maintaining speed and distance, parking and overtaking. All sorts of things are being incrementally improved and rolled out. In the States in particular, Tesla is essentially getting its customers to be test drivers, where they've paid for the fully autonomous, the higher levels of self-driving capabilities in their cars. But you are also, as Astrid and Frederick said, you are seeing on-the-road testing from a whole series of manufacturers. There have been various very small-scale tests in the UK around Milton Keynes and London and the like. But to give you a dramatic example, to my mind dramatic, is Cruise in San Francisco is licensed to have every night between the hours of 10:30 and 5 a.m. driverless cars picking up passengers. And so the public is being driven in self-driving cars without a test driver, without a safety driver. They are literally alone in these cars. Last I spoke to them, they weren't allowed to take payment, and they were limited to a particular area of the city, but they were applying to be allowed to take payment and to do the whole city. So we'll see how that develops. And then in Arizona, they're doing a last mile project. The slide I chose is a vehicle they're developing with their parent company, GM. And it has these double doors, so you can have a lot of maybe 6 passengers, 3 facing 3, but the center bit slides out with the seats and gets replaced with last mile delivery storage instead. So it's a multi-purpose vehicle. So you're seeing a change in the sort of design of the vehicle as well as the self-driving technology. So moving on to the technical challenges, and I've just illustrated this with another cruise image because it's actually a lot of their self-driving ride-hailing vehicles got confused at a junction and caused gridlock. So there definitely are from time to time issues. Now, Frederick already mentioned that we were expecting these vehicles a long time ago, and Ford was predicting we'd have vehicles without steering wheels or pedals in use by now, and that clearly isn't going to be the case at scale outside of testing. Now, there are a lot of challenges, but the hardest, I'm just going to talk about a couple of things. The first is the limitations of machine learning. Now, AI is extremely old. It's been a research area since the 1940s, but the current technology that's having this boom at the moment really emerged in actually 2012. Everyone says 2012, it's quite precise. And that was all about a reinvigorated form of machine learning, especially deep learning, where you use a neural network with many layers. And that was all predicated on the availability of very large data sets of examples, which you feed into the machine learning platform, and you give it feedback on the choices it makes until it learns to replicate the behaviors you wanted to an acceptable level of accuracy. And that's been especially powerful for computer vision. And that allows a machine to categorize what's in an image or a video stream. And as you can imagine, that's been key to autonomous vehicles. So to be able to recognize a cyclist or another car or a pedestrian has been absolutely vital. And that was really the technical challenge everyone was waiting to break. The rest of self-driving cars, route planning, maintaining a speed, that's all pretty trivial stuff. It's the visual system which has been the hardest. But the problem with machine learning, and deep learning in particular, is essentially it's a computer programming itself. It's finding out patterns which get in the data, which get it the result you want. And it may be doing this via the interaction of what are called weights, which might literally be billions of weights in a machine model to get from an input to an output. And you can imagine when you have the interaction of billions of different numbers, no one, not even the expert who worked on it, can actually understand how the decision is being made by the computer. It is the so-called black box. And that has issues with proof of safety, because you don't know what it will do in all situations or how it actually thinks. And it also has all sorts of issues for liability as well. The second big issue of machine learning is bias. And the practical issue of this, and Frederick already referred to the Uber accident in the States, where and we don't know yet if it was sensors or software, there are all sorts of issues, which shows you how complicated liability is. But it didn't have enough training examples of someone pushing a bike, let alone pushing a bike laden with shopping bags. So it couldn't categorize it. It was flipping between different categorizations. It was confused about whether there was even something there or not. And that's about the problem that practically in a data set, not all things are equally represented. And so if something's underrepresented, the car will perform relatively badly in recognizing either a type of road user, and like a wheelchair user is a classic example, and more sensitively, people of different ethnic origin as well may not be equally represented. And you may have a car that is in effect on the road more likely to kill someone from an ethnic minority because it didn't appear in the data set so much. Now, it's far more complicated than that because the solution at the moment is to pour more examples the underrepresented issue scenario or road user into your AI, that can actually displace its ability to recognize a traffic light. You can't always achieve what you want, even if you know what it is, because it is a machine programming itself. Now, this bias is also, this question of unrepresented scenarios and road users also means its operation is what's called brittle. So if it encounters a scenario it hasn't seen before, it could fail without even realizing it's failing. It could behave very inappropriately. And that is because it has no common sense. So, the fact that a ball rolling into the road means a child is in the area. A car doesn't know that. You can't tell it that. You have to give it examples so it somehow acts appropriately. So the driving part is trivial. Categorization is relatively mature, but what's currently impossible is to have a machine learning technique that captures the unspoken knowledge that we all share about how the world works. And at the moment, the only technical fix to this is to try to identify edge cases, so strange scenarios that you might encounter, and train it expressly, deliberately on those edge cases. But that relies on you identifying all the weird things that a car might encounter, which you can imagine is very challenging. And then conversely, because it has no common sense, when you're regulating this car, how do you prove, how do you test it enough on edge cases to know that it works? And then the other big technical challenge is what's called human factors, i.e. us and how we interact with the machine, whether we understand it well enough to use it appropriately. But in particular, there's this idea that we're going to get to cars which are autonomous in increasing numbers of scenarios, but until they're fully autonomous, they'll have to share responsibilities with a human driver. And there's a real problem with drivers not being able to take over control fast enough. And so there's a lot of research into monitoring actual driver behavior. Are they paying attention, etc., to try to mitigate that risk? So those are the two challenges. So turning to regulation, the thing I would say is AI per se, not only autonomous vehicles, AI per se is being regulated around the world. And the US and the EU and China and the UK are all working on that. In the US, you have a complex tapestry of different regulations state by state. And in the EU, you'll know the AI Act and the new liability proposal are all well underway. And moreover, autonomous vehicles are just a form of digitalization. They rely on software and connectivity and data like so many modern devices. And that brings with it a whole range of regulatory concerns such as liability and privacy and cybersecurity, which aren't directly to do with the task at hand, but are all going to become relevant. Now, in the UK, the government has produced a white paper on regulation where it says it's not going to focus on cross-cutting regulation, i.e. AI per se, the same way that Europe has done. And instead, it's going to focus on specific sectors, but it hasn't said what those are yet. But the guess will be financial services, life sciences, and autonomous vehicles. We shall see. But I put on screen a whole series of reviews by the Law Commission in the UK about how to regulate self-driving cars. So there is a lot of work being done, but there is a global shortage of regulators. Anyone who understands AI is in demand. And we also have in the UK a huge amount of work to do if for political reasons we want to strip old EU law out of our statute books, which is going to be a distraction for people with the skill sets to write law. Now, the actual regulation that should come out of this commission report has been delayed, tellingly, but just some of the key developments we're clearly expecting. First of all, you'll have an authorized self-driving entity, so a new legal role, someone who is actually going to be accountable for the vehicle itself. And they will have all sorts of obligations, even to the level of national security. Then this issue of the human driver having to take over control, this whole issue of the level 3, that has to be swept away in terms of law, and we have to have an absolutely rigid white line, bright line test when the driver is responsible and when the driver isn't. So the technology will have to fit in with that. But tellingly, proof of safety is currently outside of scope. This critical issue hasn't been decided yet. But interesting disclosure issues are expected with proof of safety. Also, the need for an equality statement. So is your car actually racist is going to be a very interesting legal issue. And secondly, there's going to be a new body to collect data on safety. So where there are collisions, they're going to want a whole lot of data. So for my final topic, IP, that's all very interesting because there's all of these potential requirements for disclosure, but we don't know what they are. Now, I want to leave some time for questions. So I will say at a very high level on IP, the points are this. AI, which is the core technology in an autonomous vehicle, is poorly protected by traditional IP. So data that you train it on, very hard to protect, excluded through copyright by design, very hard to patent apart from some features of a data set, generally not the data itself. Computer implemented inventions are excluded as such, so you need to show some extra technical effect. There are loads of patent applications in the AV space, but even if they get granted, these things are quite hard to enforce because the technology is often a black box, so you can't really tell what the competitor's product does. And some technology, maybe remote driving in this case, will be deployed in the cloud. And then finally, the outputs of AI, again, then with very few exceptions, they're not going to be patentable and they're not going to be copyright. So really, the de facto form of protection for a lot of this field is trade secrets. And that's when it gets really interesting, because as Astrid had said, you have all of these collaborations of multi-parties. And if you're relying on trade secrets on a patent, you have to make sure you've got very tight control over those and adequate procedures. I totally agree with Frederick that you have a very highly mobile workforce, so trade secrets will get lost that way. And they also are so in demand that most of them are able to agree with their employee that they'll be allowed to publish research. So on trade secrets, you need procedures to make sure they're not publishing the trade secrets, they're publishing stuff that's safe to publish. And then finally, you've got this issue with regulatory disclosures, which is still settling down, and increasing concern with reverse engineering. So my absolute final point, in case there are questions, is we've all talked about new business models, mobility as a service and like, and that quite possibly means companies like Google give away the technology. But more generally, car makers and service providers will be relying on the design and the brands, possibly more than the technology itself, to differentiate products. So there you go, a whirlwind tour. Thanks.
Well, thank you. Thanks a lot, Matt and Frederick, Astrid. Mind-boggling, this actually. Before we open up for questions, I'll just give you a quote that I stole some 15 years ago from a Houston professor. He said, "When there's ever a clash between technology and law, technology always wins." So if we can find that reassuring in any way, we will have these products. But I will leave the floor open for questions. So Hannah, I don't know if you want to sort of moderate that. No, then it's first come, first serve.
Yeah, if you just want to use the raise, sorry, I was on mute. If you just want to use the raise hand feature, if you have a question, you're welcome to do so.
I will ask one, Matt, if not anyone else has a question. So I think it was interesting you talked about the machine learning models and the lack of explainability, I think is the word, that not even the engineer who has programmed the machine learning model understands how the actual solution works in the end, what the AI has learned and how it's working, how it's making its decision. Mm-hmm. So I think that is a potential big issue in relation to, for example, the European AI Act according to the draft, right? I mean, that ties directly into what Per said about technology should always win, but how do you think we will find a solution to that?
So yeah, it's very interesting that you can distinguish transparency, where I give you the billion weights, and explainability, when I actually give you something meaningful so you can understand what it did. And they're very different things. And explainability is, well, to whom as well? Is it to a judge? Is it to a technical person, or is it to the general public? So it's very, very complicated. The best guidance I'm aware of is from the UK's Information Commissioner. So our privacy regulator, they've done a 3-part guide to explainability of AI with our leading centre of academic research, which is the Turing. And then there are a lot of companies increasingly saying they have technology to give you a degree of explanation. The most practical thing I've seen, to put it in a nutshell, is, let's say you're trying to get a loan, you give an explanation to people of the sorts of things that affect the decision. But that unfortunately invites people to then game the system by, you know what it looks for, so you try to give it more of that. But at the moment, it's a genuine problem, unresolved.
Yes, thanks, Matt. I had one question. I can't really see if someone else has their hand raised. Do you think, my example would be, I have something called a mini disc player in one of my drawers here somewhere.
Yeah, I got one there somewhere.
That was a sort of a glimpse in technology which was past. My question is, there's a lot of these issues that you are explaining that has to do with security on the ground.
Yeah.
I mean, these autonomous vehicles interacting with, real life other traffic and pedestrians and birds and whatever you have it. Do you think that we will see things like reserved roads, or that we will even skip the road part to go autonomous in air, where a lot of these problems at least are not the same?
Well, certainly autopilot goes back to 1911, and it's a far simpler problem because you're not dealing with, passing a school or a construction site when you're in the air, and you can take a 5-mile diversion without really changing your fuel use or your arrival time. So the challenge, if you could wave a magic wand and have special lanes, I have no doubt that that's what would happen. But you can't. Where's the business model to do the infrastructure investment? And that goes for level 4 generally. To the extent it relies on beacons and things like that. I mean, it's not really clear how we get to there. And to be controversial, although there's all of this investment, there are authors who think the lack of common sense is so fundamental that they do not see a technical solution to self-driving cars in the near future. But we shall see who's right. I can't decide that one.
No, I understand. Just a reflection then that for certain parts of the market, let's say for heavyweight transports over long distances, there could actually be a business model for specific lanes or specific routing and such.
Yeah.
Similar to train tracks, really. But anyway, thanks, Matt.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Maybe I have a question. Hello. So because you were talking about legal issues, of course, and in France actually we authorized the autonomous cars, vehicles. It's level 3 as we call it. So yeah, it's a big step. But what do you think about the territory? Because the problem is, of course, that now you have the liability which is transferred to the car builder, But what the problem is, if you have an accident tomorrow, maybe not at the level 3, maybe the level 4 we see, but what about the problem of the territory? Because if you are just a physical person and you want to sue the car builder, maybe, you know, it can be very difficult for you to bring an action abroad, or you never know these kind of rules. Maybe it would be better to have common rules to many countries to determine the good jurisdiction. Sorry. So what do you think about that, and then how to, what the process to improve this aspect?
So, if I understand the question fully, I mean, in the UK, 2018, we passed a law for self-driving cars and testing, which said you had to have driver insurance. And the aim there was to make sure that a harmed member of the public would get a payout from the insurer, no questions. And then everyone behind that wall would have a huge fight about product liability. But the member of the public would be okay. Then the second question is making sure there's someone accountable within the jurisdiction. So definitely the UK is saying you have to have someone. The current proposal from the EU, this new one about product liability, is again, you have to have someone you can sue in the EU where you're using AI. So the accountability and insurance seem to be the major models. Back in 2017, there was a white paper from the EU talking about maybe a central compensation fund based on a tax on robots. I mean, there are other suggestions, but the primary one is definitely insurance and making sure someone's in the jurisdiction who has legal obligations under regulation.
Thank you for answering.
Thanks again, Matt. I think we ran out of time and need to wrap it up, but Hannah will circulate the presentations. And Matt, please be sure that your contact information is in the version circulated.
Okay.
I saw that Frederick and Astrid's were. So thank you very much again. And we also saw that there is a book on AI by a certain author, Matt Hervey, that's for sale somewhere. So go look for that for Christmas for everyone.
Yeah.
Thanks again. And if anyone does not get the presentation, you could contact Hannah at the World Group. But give her a few days, everyone, so that we have this circulated. Okay?
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Per. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.